Hey friends, welcome back to Guess What? Compliance can be simple. I'm your host, Dr. Natasha Guess, and I'm the founder of Guess Compliance Consultant LLC, where I work with small and mid-sized healthcare practices to help them build compliance systems that actually function in real environments. Now, the last episode, we went inside the regulatory mindset. We talked about the three principles regulators use and the three questions every regulator asks. Today, we're going to get specific about where the gaps are. Because here's what I've learned from working with small and mid-sized practices. The compliance gaps that create the most regulatory exposure are not random. They are not unique to any particular specialty or practice size. They're the same four gaps showing up consistently in organizations that are otherwise doing good work and trying to do things the right way, which means they're predictable, and predictable means preventable. Let me walk you through each one of them. Gap number one that I consistently see is informal access. This is one of the most commonly cited findings in OCR investigations, and it's also one of the least recognized risks in day-to-day operations. Now, informal access means that staff are accessing patient information outside of their defined role-based permissions. And this happens in two ways. Either access controls were never clearly established in the first place, meaning there is no documented framework defining who can access what based on their role. Or access controls were established at some point, but were never updated as your staff roles changed, as staff turned over, or your systems evolved. And what I've seen in small and mid-sized practices is that this gap usually develops through helpfulness. Someone needs access to resolve an issue. They do a temporary workaround. The issue then gets resolved and everyone moves on. But no one thought about looking at that access that was granted for a temporary purpose. And it becomes permanent, and no one is the wiser. Now, your accident logs document every single one of those access. And when an investigation occurs, regulators will see every access event and ask the organization to justify each one. Accident events that cannot be connected to a documented business purpose becomes a find-in. The next gap that I see is outdated business associate agreements. And I've talked about business associate agreements in many episodes. But I want you to understand that even though most healthcare practices have BAAs with their vendors, the compliance gap is almost never the absence of an agreement. It is what happens after the agreement is signed. Vendor relationships, they evolve over time. For instance, a billing company may expand its services, a telehealth platform gets acquired, a cloud storage provider updates its data handling processes, and in most practices, none of those changes trigger a compliance review because there is no operational system in place to monitor the vendor relationship on an ongoing basis. And the result of that is a business associate agreement that describes a relationship that no longer exists between the practice and its vendor. And the vendor's scope of access has changed. The types of data being processed have expanded by vendors. The subcontractors that you have, they may have changed, but the agreement governing all of it was signed 2-3 years ago. and has not been touched since then. I see this quite often. Now, gap number 3 is your workforce training that does not actually match the workflow you currently have. We know that annual HIPAA awareness training is not a compliance program. It is a starting point. And here is the problem with generic annual training. It produces acknowledgement signatures. Your staff completes the module, they sign the form, and the organization has a record that training was delivered. But the training did not connect to the specific compliance responsibilities. And this is responsibilities of each of your staff member, each of their roles. And while they've done the training, it did not walk them through the scenarios they would actually encounter in their specific roles. It may not have told them what to do when something unexpected happens. For instance, you may have a front desk coordinator, a billing specialist, a clinical staff member, and an office manager, all completing the same training. But guess what? They all have different compliance exposure points. And generic training that treats all of your staff member the same, it does not build the role specific competency that protects the organization when something goes wrong. Effective training is role based. It is documented with specifics, not just your completion records. It is updated when workflows change, and it is reinforced throughout the year, not delivered once and forgotten. Now, gap number 4 is documentation that does not demonstrate a pattern. Remember from last episode that regulators are looking for patterns of behavior. They are looking for evidence that compliance is an ongoing operational system, not a one-time project. If your documentation is incomplete, inconsistent, or disconnected from your actual workflows, they cannot demonstrate the pattern. And in many small and mid-sized practices, the documentation that exists, the policies, the training records, the vendor agreements, they were all created at different times by different people in different formats. And that does not tell a coherent story about how the organization manages its compliance obligations. Now, when regulators look at that documentation, they'll not see a compliance program. They will see a collection of individual documents, and the absence of a coherent pattern is itself a finding. Here is what I want you to take away from this episode. Compliance gaps do not occur because organizations intentionally ignore regulations. They arise when operational systems were never built to support consistent execution. And for small and mid-sized practices, these 4 gaps, informal access, outdated vendor agreements, generic training, and fragmented documentation, they appear most consistently because they are the areas where operational growth most often outpaces compliance maintenance. Recognizing the pattern is the first step to closing it. Now, if you want to start closing those gaps today, I have 2 resources in the show notes. My book, The Compliance Trap, How Not to Get Fined, Sued, or Shut Down, is available now on Kindle, and it was specifically written for practice owners navigating exactly what we discussed today. And also, I have the Guesswork Ends Here HIPAA Compliance Template Kit, And that gives you templates and a 30-day roadmap to start building a defensible compliance foundation right now. Both links are in the show notes. Now, in the next episode, we're going to talk about HIPAA specifically, not as a legal requirement, but as an operational blueprint. Because the 3 HIPAA safeguard categories, these map directly onto functions a practice manager, a practice owner, or a COO already owns. And understanding that mapping changes how you approach compliance as a leadership responsibility. I'm Dr. Natasha Guess. Thank you for listening to Guess What? Compliance Can Be Simple. You can also schedule a free compliance strategy call using the link in the show notes. See you in the next episode. Until then, keep it simple, stay compliant, and protect your patients.